Shalom, welcome to Judaism Today, a television series produced under the auspices of the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. I'm Jack Weinshanker. With this series, we plan to bring you personalities who are involved in the conservative movement, who in their daily lives play leadership roles in the Jewish community, both in New Jersey and internationally. Our series is dedicated to the hope that understanding will promote goodwill. We believe that Judaism teaches us to work in behalf of promoting goodwill among all people, so we might hasten the fulfillment of our ancient messianic dream. Welcome to Judaism Today. Our guest this evening is Rabbi Stephen C. Lerner of Teaneck, New Jersey, who is the Rabbi of Temple Emmanuel of Richfield Park, but with some very special experiences and responsibilities in the area of conversion to Judaism, as we will discuss this evening. He is the director of the Center for Conversion to Judaism and also the chairman of the Conversion Committee of the Rabbinical Assembly, which is the rabbinic organization of the conservative movement. Rabbi Lerner, welcome to Judaism Today. We thank you for coming out, taking the time to spend this evening with us.
Delighted to be here.
The subject, as I don't have to tell you, is a very unusual one. It's the kind of subject that does not get discussed too often in too many circles, but I think it's something that affects many people in the kind of society that we have today. Could you begin by giving us a historical perspective of the attitude of the Jewish tradition towards conversion to Judaism through the ages, beginning from early times up to the present time?
Well, you know, there is an attitude today, generally accepted belief, that Judaism was not very open to conversion. That certainly wasn't true in our most creative period, most active period of 2,000 years ago. It is clear from the sources that we have that Judaism was a religion that was quite interested in spreading its message to the world in non-aggressive but open ways. We know of peoples in the ancient world who were the upper class, the king and the royalty and the kingdom of Adyabin, which would be today northern Iraq, converted to Judaism. And we know that the general feeling of the Jewish rabbinic tradition was highly positive to conversion, so much so that in the Amidah, the central prayer of Judaism, there is special mention of Gerei Tzedek, righteous converts, as people of special merit, deserving of special blessing, as one of the categories of the righteous. We know as well that in the rabbinic literature, most great biblical figures who were not seen to be Jewish were assumed to have converted. And the tradition overwhelmingly speaks with favor about such behavior. What happens is, in the course of time, a growing antagonism to Judaism occurs, and Judaism becomes less open to active teaching of conversion, but open to receiving such people. It's in the Middle Ages, when such events as the Crusades occur, after 1200, that the Jewish community is forced to turn inward and starts to see a great chasm between itself and the outside world, a chasm that it feels is imposed by the outside world. And in that world, the notion of someone converting to Judaism, or the notion of converting someone to Judaism, really falls by the wayside. It becomes a most exceptional thing. Nevertheless, there's no period in Jewish history where there aren't some people who converted. And this attitude really has continued to this century, with a few openings perhaps in the last century. In the last 40 or 50 years, there's been a remarkable change, slowly but growing year by year. And in that change, there has been more and more interest and openness to people converting. And remarkably, more and more people interested in exploring conversion. And this has been, I would say at this time, the Jewish community is in a great transition, but in this country certainly overwhelmingly in favor of conversion to Judaism, and there exist more and more programs to assist such people in converting. The Jewish law itself, the Shulchan Aruch, our basic code of Jewish law, reports the requirements of conversion and has no critical statements about that.
Is there any such thing in the tradition or in the law that suggests an exclusivity of the Jewish people in that sense, that it might be closed? Is there anything like that?
Certainly not in the mainstream of the tradition. When you have a tradition that's 4,000 years old, you can find all kinds of little side points, but not in the major tradition.
So it would be open to people of all ethnic backgrounds?
Absolutely.
Any racial?
There certainly is
any
no limitations, I mean, except that you must affirm Judaism exclusively. You can't share two religious traditions.
And it must be sincere.
Obviously, it must be sincere, but there is no limitation of any sort.
Okay. You kind of touched on some of the recent things that have been happening. Could you give us some idea as to what are some of the recent trends in this area? There are some studies that have been done in recent years of what kind of numbers are we talking about?
Well, the studies are not very clear. I mean, there are different studies, but the estimate could be probably 10,000 people a year converting to Judaism in this country. Perhaps 6,000 or so under the auspices of the Reform movement, 3,000 or more under the auspices of the conservative movement, our own movement. And the number seems to be growing. And there are remarkable people who have joined Judaism and the Jewish people as a result of these conversions.
Is there any way of assessing how successful these conversions are for some of these numbers? Is there anything like that?
Well, there's been some studies, and clearly not every conversion succeeds any more than any marriage succeeds. But by and large, they seem to be quite successful. The evidence is not in numbers necessarily, because I don't have that evidence, but in just the fact that you now have rabbis who are converts to Judaism, you have teachers of Judaica, graduate students of Judaism, rabbis' wives who are converts to Judaism, presidents of synagogues, communal leaders who have converted to Judaism, and who are gaining wide acceptance within the community. I mean, it's hard to imagine a community hiring someone as a rabbi knowing that that person is a convert if there is significant resistance to the notion. And that's really what's been happening.
One of the things I think is rather widely known, that in the Jewish community there are different subgroupings, if you will, the Orthodox, the Conservative, and Reform. How do the various perspectives differ in terms of their outlook on the question of conversion and how to handle it?
Well, the Reform have certainly been the most aggressive in terms of advocating conversion. They do not, however, require the principles of Jewish law in terms of conversion, that is, immersion in a mikveh, circumcision, and things of that sort. So there is a real problem for many people with the validity of that conversion. Not the sincerity of the person, but with the legal validity of the conversion, because many of the requirements of Jewish law, of the halakha, were not followed. And that is, I think, a very real problem that will have continuing problems for Jewish life, because you will have a growing number of people who think they're Jewish, and in fact are recognized as Jews by some and not by others. And the issue is not who has converted them. The issue is that there are certain time-honored requirements of Jewish law that were not followed. The conservative movement and the committee that I chair has become quite clear and unequivocal in terms of favorable approach to outreach as well. We believe that outreach to people who are interested is an important and positive
when you say
fact
outreach,
of Jewish life.
what are you referring to?
Well, I think outreach in the sense of making aware to the community as a whole that if they are interested, we are here for them. No one is advocating in Jewish life, at least no one responsible, standing on street corners, passing out information, going door to door, trying to make people that way. The outreach indicates that both through the community and even into the larger community, we are willing to make a statement, as we have through classes and other things, that if people are interested, we are here to help them and to try to teach them Judaism, but in a serious and way following the requirements of Jewish law. Within the Orthodox community, there is great ambivalence, the ambivalence that the tradition has reflected over 1,500 years. There is a general opposition to converting people where marriage is a prime consideration, and frankly, most converts initially come, or most potential converts initially come because of the possibility of marriage. There's a great deal of resistance to that, and there is even a great deal of resistance to converts generally, so that very little is being done in that community. There are a few rabbis who are more favorable, but by and large it is a real problem, and in other parts of the world it is almost impossible. I get calls from time to time and letters about people going through harrowing experiences in other nations where orthodoxy is far more dominant than here, and almost the impossibility of conversion.
In your experience, what are some of the reasons that motivate people to convert to Judaism?
Well, I mean, I think first reason is family, the possibility of children, and creating a firm and whole unit within the family. In other words, in terms of marriage. I point out that converting from marriage is not enough. People have to accept Judaism for their own sake as well. I mean, there has to be an understanding that this matters to them, not for someone else. And some of the reasons clearly are respect for the belief in one unequivocal God, in other words, this absolute monotheism that is at the heart of Judaism, and not in a Trinitarian form. That's an important consideration. The respect for Jewish emphasis on reason and learning, very powerful with many people. Many intellectually oriented people love the idea that this is a religion that demands learning of them. Some of the other factors would be the emphasis on ritual, the emphasis on a sanctified life. This seems very powerful to them. And for some people, it is a very special identification with the nobility of Jewish history and the Jewish people.
For someone who has converted to Judaism, what kinds of recommendations, what kinds of suggestions would you make to them to attain the maximum fulfillment that they can out of that?
You mean before or after?
After.
Well, I think one of the most important things is to recognize that the moment of conversion is just one stage in a lifelong process of growing as a Jew, and that one cannot release oneself from that kind of commitment. You've got to do it, you've got to work at it, because, I mean, someone brought up with me earlier today an analogy to a bar mitzvah. You reach a peak, and then you can slide down. And you know as well as I do that is unfortunately true of some of our bar mitzvah kids. That certainly is not what should happen here, but once one is finished with a program, one is on one's own. And therefore there has to be a self-generating, continuing commitment to do and to work at it and to make it significant. Another very important consideration is finding a community, a synagogue community, where are some like-minded Jews and where there is encouragement by the rabbi and by these like-minded Jews, so that they have a place that reinforces their sense of Jewish commitment. That's very important. It's exceptionally important for an individual who converts, of whom there are a small but growing number, but it is also very important for couples as well. If they move to Yehupitz, wherever that is, they can wind up in real problems because there's no reinforcement of what they've tried to do, and most of them don't as yet have significant knowledge to be able to maintain that Jewish commitment on their own, and nor should they. That's not a Jewish idea. I think those are very important things. Get yourself a rabbi and find yourself a fellow student.
Link
Keep
up with
working
the
at
Jewish
it.
community,
That's
yes,
right.
in a tangible way. How well are converts to Judaism accepted in the community in a realistic sense, in terms of what roles can they play, what kinds of participation are open to them?
I think there's a growing acceptance. The president of my synagogue is a convert. I mean, there is no issue about his Jewish commitment at Temple Emmanuel of Richfield Park. He is a Jew, and he's a lot more committed Jew than most others one is likely to find in synagogues or in the Jewish community as a whole. And obviously there are now rabbis and other Jewish leaders, and I think that acceptance is growing. It is not total. I just heard of a story today that was troubling. And this is of a fine young rabbi whose wife, as a student, when he was a student, and kind of independently met, and each grew more Jewish. It happened that she wasn't Jewish, and he was, and she converted. And she is an outstanding Jew, and this is a decade later. And this rabbi has been exploring a new synagogue, and he just received a call from one of the leaders of the search committee that they're a little troubled because, you know, if he married someone who wasn't Jewish or converted, maybe that will, create an atmosphere of acceptance of interdating in the community. And indeed, I think nothing would be further from the truth. The fact that this woman is a convert, the fact that he is a very fine and committed rabbi, can be a model of a very significant kind of Jewish behavior. But there are these fears within the community. I've often thought that sometimes the laity is behind the rabbis in this regard, in terms of acceptance of a full-fledged acceptance of one as a convert.
Would you say that holds true in the Orthodox community too, that once a person converts in an Orthodox community that they're also accepted?
Oh, yes. Yes, there's no question. There are just many less of them, but I think the problem is among the Jews who don't care about anything about Judaism and see it completely as an ethnic dimension. These people have no way of gauging religious commitment, and therefore it seems impossible for them to understand and to really accept. But within Orthodoxy, there's even an Orthodox rabbi I know of who is a convert.
What would you say to a person who has been convinced by the family situation? Let's say a person wants to get married to a Jewish person, or for whatever reason, and they've been convinced that for the sake of peace in the family or satisfying an in-law, go through the motions of converting to Judaism. What do you do in a situation like that?
Well, I think I point out to the people that that's just not good enough, and that there's an issue of integrity here. I mean, I'm trying to create and help guide people into significant Judaism. I also like to help families, but it is illusory to think that if someone converts for the sake of a father-in-law, that that's going to mean anything, and what is then visited on the community is a hoax. And I'm not sure any of us who are involved in Jewish leadership should be parties to a hoax. And today was a day for experiences. A couple came to see me today about conversion, and the fellow indicated that his brother-in-law had gone through a conversion process. He did it just for the family. The sister didn't care. The husband really didn't care. He did it for the father-in-law, who kind of insisted upon it. They now have a child, and they're not doing anything. I mean, they're not Christians, but they're not Jews, not in any real way. And I indicated to this gentleman's fiancée, who was interested in converting, that that's no way to do it, and nor should one do it. I mean, because the kind of momentary happiness and removal of guilt and pain that might occur will have no meaning afterwards. That these people, that's right, these people have to find and search, and hopefully can find with encouragement, meaning in Judaism for themselves. And the Jewish partner is very important, because if the Jewish partner is indifferent or hostile or lukewarm and is not willing to grow also, that does not afford good hope and good prospects for the conversion. So it's really a double conversion process.
Something that's in a slightly different direction. Recently in the news, there was an incident in the state of Israel, which you must have heard of, about a woman who had been converted to Judaism in the United States. And some of the bureaucracy of Israel wouldn't accept her conversion in the United States. It was done by a Reform rabbi, I think in Colorado, and they were not accepting her conversion as a Jewish identification. Could you comment on that, of how we handle that kind of situation, where in the community different groups may be doing it differently, and how do we handle these people?
Well, I mean, it's a very real problem. The issue, as I think I indicated before, was the conversion done correctly according to Jewish law? Was it done incorrectly? I don't know the situation firsthand there, obviously. My sense was that it was not done according to the requirements of Jewish law. There is a significant sentiment within the Rabbinical Assembly, the organization of conservative rabbis whose conversion committee I chair, that if the conversion was not done according to Jewish law, then the person is an incomplete Jew. And therefore, the problem that would exist in Israel would be a problem for me and for many of our colleagues as well. What I would hope is that for the sake of the unity of the Jewish people, the Reform movement would understand that and try to move in ways to make a kind of unified approach to conversion. This is just too important an issue for every one of us to go on their own way. We have not veered from the requirements of Jewish law on this. I would like to hope that the Reform would come to see the wisdom of returning to the requirements of Jewish law in this area.
Do you see that in the cards? Is there anything being done to try to bring some uniformity or consistency or unity in that sense?
Well, I think it's a very real problem. I think the Reform movement has said that they have integrity, which I have no doubt about, and that they have a way of looking at Judaism which is different from others, and other people just have to do that. But there is a very serious problem in this area. I know that the Reform rabbinate outside of this country is much more traditional and unhappy with many of the Reform stands on the issue of Gerut.
When you say outside the country, where do you
mean in Europe, there are a significant number of Reform rabbis there. In Israel, I understand in Canada. In other words, they are obviously many less of them than here, but their attitude is different. They are much more concerned about the requirements of Jewish law and the unity of the Jewish people than many of their colleagues here. So there are Reform rabbis here who have spoken out against it, but their hands are tied.
What would a person, let's say, who has gone through a conversion where they may feel they would like to go to Israel, and they may feel that perhaps that conversion might not qualify? Is there anything they can do to upgrade that, or to perhaps change it so that they can make it? Is it possible to do something like that?
Yes, I have, every year there are 1, 2, 3 people who come to see me who've gone through Reform conversions and who on their own realize that there is some inadequacy in it, not according to learning, but according to the requirements of Jewish law. And we just complete the conversion. I once had a woman say, I didn't feel Jewish enough. I was converted by 3 Reform rabbis. I want to be reconverted. I refused to do it. I said, if you were converted with a proper bet din, a proper court, you went to the mikveh, the ritual bath, and you don't need another conversion. I'll teach you more. You didn't feel you got enough lessons, but I won't reconvert you. But where there's an obvious flaw within the conversion in terms of Jewish law, then I would. We've done that many times. We would take the family to the mikveh.
In terms of the average congregation, whether it's programming or the kind of atmosphere they can generate, what can congregations do to encourage those people who have converted to Judaism, perhaps make them feel more comfortable, help them participate more widely in activities?
Well, I think one thing, which is something I suggested last year and was followed up, is to set up a Hachnasat Gerim program, a welcoming of converts program on Shavuot. This holiday of Revelation is when the book of Ruth is traditionally read in the synagogue, and the book of Ruth tells a story of someone who has become a Jew from outside. And it seems to me it is appropriate on that festival that a program where we talk about conversion in a positive way, we have some readings about conversion, we have a convert speak, can make a difference. And by publicizing it and making a part of the synagogue program, not some underground thing, but something really as a part of a major holiday, I think can help both the person who's converted and the congregation feel more at home. There are other things. I've run support groups for people who have converted and are converting, and I continue to do that. And it seems to me that's very important because...
What are they?
Well, support groups are groups where people come to get together, and I'm kind of just a little negotiator there to talk about some of the problems they have, which, by the way, don't end when they convert. You know, the problem of Christmas, the problem of the Gentile parent, the problem of the Jewish parent. They could fault them for being a convert. They could fault them for getting too religious. You never know what's going to happen. Talking about feeling Jewish in terms of the Jewish community, how developing a sense of Jewish ethnicity, dealing with friends who are somewhat rejecting of them because they've become so religious or have rejected Christianity or another religion. Converts need a chance to talk about problems, and those problems continue certainly for a few years afterwards. And these support groups have really been quite wonderful and quite successful in helping people do that. Other things that I do through my Center for Conversion to Judaism are I run retreat weekends, which are give a convert or a potential convert or an actual convert a chance to live an intensely Jewish atmosphere of Shabbat, of the Sabbath, over a weekend, and to learn and to discuss and to talk. So those have been positive things.
Rabbi, I thank you very much. This has been a very enlightening discussion. I think we can help some people here, and I think we have provided a service. And I think the work you're doing, I admired now for some time when I first got to know you, and I wish you a good deal of luck in the work you do. And thank you for your work and for coming here this evening.
Pleasure to be here.
We would like to thank our guest for joining us for this program. We hope you will tune in for our next program in the series, Judaism Today. Judaism Today is brought to you by the New Jersey region of the United Synagogue of America. We welcome your comments and suggestions, and we invite you to write to us at the United Synagogue of America, 910 Salem Avenue, Hillside, New Jersey, 07205. That's the United Synagogue of America, 910 Salem Avenue, Hillside, New Jersey, 07205.